Cops arrested stepmom of killing husband, until 8-year-old reveals the secret. When a husband is found dead, his wife, Lydia, is arrested as the prime suspect. With all the evidence pointing to her troubled marriage, financial gain, and inconsistent statements, the case seems closed. But then an 8-year-old boy, the victim's son, whispers a chilling truth. He saw a masked man in the house. Could Lydia really be innocent? As Detective Sara Burns digs deeper, she uncovers shocking evidence that points to a hidden culprit. But the closer she gets to the truth, the more dangerous the investigation becomes. Secrets are exposed, and a shocking betrayal comes to light. Who killed Daniel Gray? Was it the stepmom? Or is someone else still lurking in the shadows? Watch the full video to discover. If this is your first time here on our channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our amazing stories. Now, let's jump into the full story. It was a crisp autumn morning when Detective Sara Burns was called to the picturesque neighborhood of Maplewood Lane. The tranquility of the area was shattered by the discovery of Daniel Gray's lifeless body in his home. His wife, Lydia, sobbed uncontrollably in the living room while uniformed officers secured the scene. Neighbors whispered about the Grays' troubled marriage. The couple had argued frequently, and some even claimed Lydia had threatened divorce. A freshly opened life insurance policy in Daniel's name made Lydia the prime suspect. Sara surveyed the scene. Daniel's body lay near the kitchen, a blunt force injury to his head. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared stolen. "It's always the spouse," a junior officer muttered. Sara glanced toward Toby, Daniel's 8-year-old son, sitting silently on the couch, clutching a tattered teddy bear. His wide eyes watched everyone, but he didn't say a word. After hours of questioning Lydia, inconsistencies in her statements led to her arrest. "I didn't kill him," she screamed as officers led her away. Toby tugged at Sara's sleeve as she prepared to leave. "Detective," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "I know what happened." Sara knelt to meet his gaze. "What do you know, Toby?" she asked gently. Toby's lips trembled as he began to speak, and Sara realized that this case was far from closed. As Lydia Gray sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room, her tear-streaked face told a story of desperation. "I didn't kill him," she repeated, her voice cracking. "You have to believe me. I loved my husband." Detective Sara Burns sat across from her, carefully observing her every movement. "The evidence doesn't look good, Lydia," Sara said calmly. "You argued often, and you stood to gain a lot from Daniel's death." Lydia's head snapped up. "I didn't even know about the insurance policy until you told me. Why would I kill the father of my stepson?" she cried. Sara frowned. The case seemed too neat, too obvious. Still, the forensics team had found no signs of forced entry, and Lydia was the only adult in the house at the time. Meanwhile, 8-year-old Toby Gray sat quietly in another room, clutching a stuffed bear. A social worker gently asked him questions, but Toby remained silent, his wide eyes filled with fear. When Sara glanced at the one-way mirror into Toby's room, something about his posture unsettled her. Why wasn't he speaking? What had he seen? Lydia's voice broke Sara's concentration. "You need to find who really did this," she pleaded. "Toby needs me. I would never hurt his father." Sara leaned back in her chair, undecided. As damning as the evidence was, something about Lydia's raw desperation felt real. And Toby's silence? That might hold the answer to everything. Sara couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. As she left the interrogation room, she glanced through the observation window into a separate room where Toby, Daniel's 8-year-old son, sat silently. His small frame seemed swallowed by the chair. He clutched a worn-out stuffed bear, staring blankly at the wall. Sara stepped inside, crouching to meet his eye level. "Hi, Toby. I'm Detective Sara. I'm here to help," she said gently. Toby flinched slightly, but didn't respond. "Do you want to tell me about your dad?" she continued. He nodded slowly, but remained silent. Toby's teacher had described him as a bright, talkative child, but today he seemed a shadow of himself. His mother's arrest must have terrified him. Sara placed a drawing pad and crayons on the table. "Sometimes it's hard to talk. If you want, you can draw me a picture instead." At first, Toby didn't move. Then slowly, he picked up a red crayon and began drawing. Sara watched as his small hands worked carefully. He sketched a house, a window, and a figure inside. Then, unexpectedly, he added a shadowy figure outside the window, holding something long and sharp. When he was done, he pushed the pad towards Sara and whispered, "I saw him." Sara's heart skipped. "Who, Toby?" she asked softly. "The man," Toby said, his voice barely audible. He hurt Dad. Sarah's pulse quickened. Could this be the missing piece? Toby remained silent for what felt like an eternity, his small hands gripping his stuffed bear tighter. Sarah sat patiently, offering him a soft smile. "It's okay, Toby. You're safe here," she reassured him. Finally, Toby's lips parted, and a barely audible whisper escaped. I saw something." Sarah leaned in gently. "What did you see, Toby?" Toby's voice trembled as he spoke. "A man in the house that night. He was wearing black, with a mask. He hurt my dad." His eyes filled with tears, and he buried his face into his bear. Sarah's heart pounded. A masked intruder? This wasn't in the initial reports. She pressed carefully. "Did you see his face or hear him say anything?" Toby shook his head but added, "He dropped something shiny by the door." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. This revelation was a bombshell. If Toby's account was true, Lydia might be innocent. Sarah thanked Toby softly and stepped out, her mind working through the details. Back at the crime scene, she instructed her team to re-examine the area near the door. After some time, an officer approached her, holding a small, blood-stained knife wrapped in plastic. "Found this in the bushes by the entryway, Detective." Sarah stared at the evidence. If this knife belonged to the intruder, the case was about to take a dramatic turn. She knew Toby's fragile voice might hold the key to uncovering the truth. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as Toby's revelation sank in. A masked man? This detail hadn't surfaced in the investigation. She kept her tone calm. "Toby, you're doing really well. Can you tell me more about the man?" Toby hugged his bear tightly. "He was big. I woke up because I heard loud voices. Daddy told me to stay in my room, but I peeked through the door." Sarah gently pressed on. "Did you see what happened after that?" Toby nodded slowly, his eyes glistening with tears. "The man pushed Daddy, and then there was a loud bang. Daddy fell. I wanted to scream, but the man looked at me." His voice cracked. "He saw me, but he ran away." Sarah's stomach churned. Toby's account painted a completely different picture than what the evidence suggested. If what he said was true, Lydia might not be guilty after all. "Toby," Sarah asked softly, "did you tell anyone else about this?" He shook his head. "I was scared. Mommy told me not to talk to strangers, but you're nice. I think you can help." Sarah smiled warmly, even as her mind raced. If there was an intruder, they needed to uncover the truth fast. Leaving Toby with a child advocate, she called her partner, Detective Hayes. "We need to re-examine the evidence," she said firmly. "The boy's story changes everything." And with that, the investigation took a startling turn. Detective Sara Burns stood at the crime scene with Detective Hayes, her mind swirling with new questions. Toby's account had thrown the entire case into disarray. There was no mention of a masked intruder in Lydia's statements, and no one had found any evidence pointing to an outside party. Everything pointed to Lydia, until now. "We need to double-check everything," Sarah said, her voice steady but urgent. "There's got to be something we missed." Hayes nodded, already on the phone with the forensics team. "I'll have them recheck the scene and confirm the knife." "What about Lydia? Do you think she's hiding something?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I believe she's telling the truth. I don't think she killed Daniel." With the knife found outside the house, Sarah instructed the team to focus on the backyard and the surrounding area. There had to be more evidence that pointed to the intruder. As the team searched, Sarah stood near the entrance, replaying every moment of the investigation in her mind. The lack of forced entry still bugged her. How had the killer gotten in? That's when she spotted something near the back door, an almost imperceptible scuff mark on the floor. She crouched down to get a closer look. "Found something," she murmured. A small footprint, barely noticeable, was imprinted in the dust. It was faint, but it was enough. Someone had entered through the back. This discovery was more than just a clue, it was a breakthrough. The small footprint was enough to shift the investigation's focus. Sarah knelt by the back door, examining the print more closely. It was distinct, but faint, as though the person had been in a hurry. She stood up slowly, a sense of urgency mounting within her. "Hayes," she called to her partner, who was examining a pile of scattered papers nearby. "You need to see this." Hayes approached quickly. "What is it?" Sarah pointed to the footprint. "It's a fresh mark. Someone came in through the back, not the front. That changes everything." Hayes crouched down, carefully inspecting the footprint. "Could it be from the night of the murder?" Sarah nodded. "I think so. The dirt is still soft, and it hasn't been disturbed much. This wasn't here before. She quickly relayed the discovery to the forensic team, urging them to collect samples from the print. As they worked, Sarah's mind raced. Toby had been right. There had been an intruder. Now they had physical evidence to prove it. As the team processed the print, Sarah turned to Hayes. We need to find out who this is. Let's look at Daniel's business contacts, old enemies, anyone who could have had a motive to harm him. But as they discussed leads, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. Why hadn't Lydia mentioned an intruder? Was there something more to the story? One thing was certain, they were getting closer to the truth. The forensic team quickly confirmed that the footprint was fresh, but it wasn't a clear match to anyone in their immediate database. It seemed they were looking for a ghost, someone who didn't leave obvious traces behind. Sarah's frustration was mounting. The more they uncovered, the more questions surfaced. With the footprint as their only lead, Sarah and Hayes turned to Daniel's business dealings, hoping to find any potential enemies. The investigation revealed a few troubling details. Daniel had been involved in a series of legal disputes with a former partner, Mark Hawthorne. Hawthorne had once worked with Daniel on a construction project that went sour, but no one had suspected him of anything violent. Sarah reviewed the files on Hawthorne, noting his connections to several shady individuals in the underworld. Could Hawthorne have sent someone to kill Daniel? She wondered aloud. That's a possibility, Hayes agreed. But we still need more to connect him to the crime. Sarah frowned, tapping her fingers on the desk. Something felt off about the case. Something beyond just the obvious clues. The way Lydia had acted during her interrogation nagged at her. Was it possible Lydia knew more than she was letting on? Just then, Sarah's phone rang. It was the forensic team. We've got something, detective, the voice on the other end said. We found traces of another person's blood inside the house. It's not Lydia's, and it's not Daniel's. Sarah's heart raced. They weren't just hunting for an intruder anymore. They were hunting for a killer. The news hit Sarah like a thunderclap. Traces of another person's blood inside Daniel's house. This wasn't just an intruder. It was someone who had been injured, someone who had been there during the struggle. The question was who? Sarah quickly called Hayes. We need to focus on this new blood evidence. It could be the key to everything. As they combed through the details of the case, Sarah's mind kept returning to Lydia. Could she have been protecting someone? Was there more to her story than she had let on? In the days that followed, Sarah's team worked tirelessly to track down the blood sample, but they didn't find any immediate matches in their database. Then, unexpectedly, an anonymous tip came in. A man had been seen at the local hospital recently, treated for a minor wound, a deep cut on his hand. The timing was suspicious. Sarah and Hayes raced to the hospital, hoping to find the connection. They were led to a man named Jason Miller, a local mechanic with a criminal history. He was being treated for a hand injury that matched the blood evidence found at the crime scene. But when Sarah questioned him, he denied any involvement in the murder. I didn't kill him. I swear, Jason insisted, visibly nervous. I was hired to fix a car, that's it. I didn't even know Daniel. Sarah's instincts told her something was off. She needed to dig deeper, but Jason's story didn't add up. Was he lying? Or was he hiding something much bigger? Sarah could feel the tension building as Jason Miller sat across from her in the interrogation room, his nervousness growing with each question. His story about fixing a car seemed flimsy, especially when it became clear that he had been lying about key details. But he insisted over and over that he had no involvement in Daniel's murder. Jason, Sarah said, leaning forward, her voice calm but unwavering. You were at the scene. Your blood was found inside the house. We know you were hurt. What were you really doing there? Jason's face flushed. His fingers twitched nervously as he glanced toward the door, as if hoping for a way out. After a long pause, he sighed deeply. All right, I'll tell you. He lowered his head, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't want to hurt him. But Daniel, he knew about my past. I couldn't let him tell anyone. Sarah's heart raced as she listened. What are you talking about? Jason glanced up, his eyes filled with shame. I worked with Mark Hawthorne a few years ago, fixing cars for him under the table. I wasn't involved in the illegal stuff, but Daniel found out. He threatened to go to the cops. I panicked. I went to talk to him, to make him understand. But when he wouldn't listen, I lost control. Jason's voice cracked as he continued. I didn't mean to kill him, detective. It just happened. I saw his wife, Lydia, and I thought she'd want him gone too. So I ran. I didn't know what else to do. Sara was silent for a moment, processing the revelation. Jason had been caught up in something much bigger than he had anticipated, and in his panic, he had made the mistake of involving Lydia's name. But Lydia had no idea about the murder, no clue that her husband's betrayal had gone so far. Sara sighed, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Lydia didn't know Jason. You're going to need to tell her the truth. Jason nodded, his face pale. He had unwittingly tangled Lydia in a web of lies that had nearly cost her everything. Later that day, Sara met with Lydia. The moment she saw Lydia's tear-streaked face, Sara knew the truth had to come out. She explained everything, about Jason's involvement, his confession, and the truth about the blood evidence. Lydia's expression was a mixture of disbelief and relief. "I never knew," she whispered, her hands trembling. "I thought he was dead because of me. I never thought someone would do this to him." It was over. Jason Miller was arrested for Daniel's murder, and Lydia was exonerated. But for Sara, the case still lingered in her mind. She had unraveled the truth, but it came at a cost. The real killer was behind bars, but the grief for Daniel's family would last forever. In the end, justice had been served, but at the cost of shattered lives.